1954, Greyhound had a dream, a big one. They wanted to build the future of travel, a bus that looked like a train, something bold, beautiful, and futuristic. That's how the Scenicruiser was born. At first glance, the Scenicruiser was stunning. It had 2 levels, like a double-decker. Big, panoramic windows, a sleek, silver body. It was the kind of bus people would stop and stare at. Greyhound believed this was the future of American road travel. They were excited. They ordered over 1,000 buses. It was their biggest investment ever. But behind the shiny design, there was a dark secret. From the very beginning, there were problems. Big ones. First, the engine. Greyhound wanted a bus with power, speed, and comfort, but no single engine was strong enough, so they used 2 engines. Yes, 2. One engine alone couldn't move the massive Scenicruiser. Together, they powered the giant machine. But that created a whole new problem. These twin engines didn't work well together. They often went out of sync. One would overheat, the other would stall. Sometimes, both would just shut down in the middle of the road. Drivers were frustrated. Passengers were left stranded. Greyhound started getting thousands of complaints. Worse, the bus was hard to fix. Mechanics weren't trained for this kind of design. Every repair took longer and cost more. Some garages refused to work on them. Then came the safety issues. The suspension was weak on bumpy roads. Passengers felt like they were riding a roller coaster. Windows cracked under pressure. The rear axle sometimes bent under the weight of the bus. One incident stood out. In 1956, a Scenicruiser full of passengers broke down in the middle of the desert. The heat was unbearable. There was no phone. No help for miles. People were stuck for hours. A passenger fainted. Greyhound's image took a massive hit. And yet, they kept using the buses. Why? Because they had spent millions. It was too late to turn back. Greyhound was trapped by its own ambition, and the Scenicruiser, once a symbol of progress, had become a disaster on wheels. But the real shock came when drivers started quitting. The bus was hard to steer, especially on long routes. The clutch system was stiff and unreliable. Some drivers reported pain in their legs from working the pedals. Others feared breakdowns on dangerous roads. One driver, Tom Richards, had enough. After 20 years with Greyhound, he handed in his resignation. His words became famous among the staff. "I love the job, but I won't drive a coffin on wheels." The news spread. Passengers lost trust. Drivers left. Mechanics refused to work. And Greyhound, once America's most trusted name in bus travel, began losing money fast. But what made this disaster even worse was what happened next. Because Greyhound thought they could fix it, they believed a few tweaks would save the Scenicruiser. They were wrong. What they did next nearly destroyed the entire company. After all the problems with the Scenicruiser, Greyhound had 2 options: give up on the project or try to fix it. They chose the second. But the decision would push them closer to collapse. Greyhound called in General Motors, the same company that helped design the bus. Engineers were brought in. Meetings went on for weeks. Everyone knew, if they didn't solve the Scenicruiser problem fast, Greyhound might go bankrupt. Their first plan was simple: replace the twin engines with a single, more powerful one. That way, the buses would be easier to maintain and more reliable. Sounds like a smart move, right? But there was a problem. The new engines weren't ready, so Greyhound had to wait. Meanwhile, the old twin-engine buses were still breaking down. Every day, more complaints came in. Passengers posted angry letters in newspapers. Some even sued the company for being stranded or injured. To calm the public, Greyhound launched a big advertising campaign. They showed happy families riding the Scenicruiser, smiling out of the big windows. They used words like luxury and adventure, but people weren't buying it anymore. They had already experienced the truth. Then Greyhound made another move. They upgraded the brakes, reinforced the suspension, added better air conditioning, and fixed some of the structural issues. They called it the new and improved Scenicruiser. It sounded good on paper, but on the roads, things were still going wrong. The redesign had made the buses heavier, and the added weight put more pressure on the rear axle, the same part that was already bending on bumpy roads. In some cases, the rear tires exploded. One accident even caused a fire, though thankfully, no one died. The company was now losing money at an alarming rate. Every breakdown cost money. Every canceled trip hurt their image. Every lawsuit added more pressure. Employees were stressed, drivers were angry, and mechanics were burned out from trying to fix a bus that didn't want to be fixed. One mechanic said, "It's like patching a sinking ship with paper." Meanwhile, Greyhound's competitors were rising. Trailways, a smaller bus company, was offering newer, safer buses. Their trips were reliable, their drivers were calm, and passengers began to switch. By 1957, the company's leadership knew they had made a terrible mistake, but it was too late. Over 1,000 Scenicruisers were already on the roads. They couldn't just throw them away, so they tried something desperate. They began to secretly retire the worst buses. Quietly, no big announcements. They just removed them from the schedule. But drivers talked. Passengers noticed. Whispers started spreading. Greyhound's big dream bus is dying. The media picked it up. Headlines read, Scenicruiser, luxury failure. Greyhound silver beast goes bust. Investors panicked. Stock prices fell. Internally, Greyhound was in chaos. To save face, they rushed out a press release. They claimed the Scenicruiser was a pioneer design, and that all new technology has challenges. They said the future was still bright, but nobody believed them anymore. And yet, through all of this, Greyhound still refused to admit defeat. They kept the Scenicruisers on the road, kept trying to fix the unfixable, hoping somehow it would all work out. But what they didn't expect was how deeply the damage would run, not just financially, but emotionally. Because what the Scenicruiser did wasn't just break down buses, it broke trust, and that would take decades to rebuild. But the biggest twist in this story wasn't even about the bus itself. It was about the company behind it, a company that once ruled the roads of America, now hanging by a thread. What finally forced Greyhound to make the decision that would change everything. By 1958, Greyhound was in trouble. The Scenicruiser had gone from a symbol of the future to a punchline in late-night jokes. Passengers called it the brake cruiser. Mechanics called it Frankenstein on wheels. Drivers simply called it a curse. But Greyhound still had over 1,000 Scenicruisers in service. Every day, they gambled with breakdowns, bad press, and angry customers. They were losing money fast, millions every quarter, and their once shining reputation was rusting away. Then, it got worse. A high-profile breakdown made national news. A Scenicruiser carrying tourists broke down on a mountain road. The brakes failed. The driver barely avoided a crash. Passengers were rescued by police after waiting for hours in the cold. Cameras were rolling. It was on TV that night. The country watched, and Greyhound couldn't hide anymore. Within days, the CEO was called into an emergency meeting with the board. There was yelling, accusations. Some board members wanted to sue General Motors. Others wanted to shut down part of the company. Everyone wanted answers, but no one had a clear solution. Finally, a painful decision was made. Greyhound would recall the Scenicruiser fleet. Every last one. They would replace the twin engines with single, more reliable Detroit diesel engines. They would reinforce the axles, rebuild the brakes, and redesign the entire underbody. It would cost millions, money they didn't have. But they had no choice. And still, that wouldn't fix the deeper problem. The Scenicruiser had created a trust gap between the company and the people who once loved it. For decades, Greyhound was known as the safe, affordable, and iconic way to travel across America. The Scenicruiser destroyed that image. Passengers weren't just disappointed. They were hurt. Some had been stranded overnight. Some had feared for their safety. Some never returned to Greyhound again. Even after the rebuild, the damage was done. The Scenicruiser never fully recovered its reputation. It became a quiet ghost in the Greyhound fleet, seen but not celebrated. By the early 1970s, the company quietly began retiring them. No announcements, no tributes, just slow, silent removal. The last Scenicruiser was taken off the road in 1977. It was the end of an era, but not the end of the story. Because the Scenicruiser disaster left scars that changed Greyhound forever. They became more cautious with innovation. They stopped chasing flash and focused more on function. Safety became their top concern. They rebuilt their brand brick by brick, but it took decades. Internally, the story of the Scenicruiser was never spoken of openly. Some called it the big mistake. Others simply called it that bus. And yet, for all its failures, the Scenicruiser left behind something else too, a lesson. A warning about chasing style over substance. A reminder that not everything that looks beautiful will work. And a cautionary tale for every company trying to build the future without listening to the people who actually use it. Today, a few restored Scenicruisers still exist in museums. Shiny, polished, and parked. People walk around them and take photos, amazed by the design, but most have no idea of the chaos they once caused. To many, it's just a cool old bus. But to those who lived through it, it's the machine that almost destroyed Greyhound. And maybe, just maybe, it saved them too, by forcing them to change before it was truly too late. So next time you see an old bus on the road, remember, it might have a secret story inside. Just like the Scenicruiser,